As the COVID-19 virus continues to spread across the world, close to 4 billion people in over 90 countries are now under various levels of lockdown. This new condition is changing our lives and has forced us to break with our normal. In this interview series, we give updates on the impacts of the pandemic in developing countries and analysis from leaders and representatives of social movements and progressive groups that are mobilizing in their society to address not just the health crisis, but also the systemic economic, social, environmental, and gender injustices there. The lockdown being implemented, especially without adequate support to people and preparation on the part of governments, is undermining core human needs and leaving millions vulnerable to a sudden loss of access to means of survival. Many people simply cannot self isolate, practice physical distancing, or stop working. Today, I will talk to Vishwa Satgar from South Africa. Vish, as he is commonly known by friends, has been an activist for over 3 decades. He founded the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center. It's a grassroots development organization which is working with social movements since 1999. He is an associate professor at International Relations at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, and edits the books series Democratic Marxism being published by the university. Hello, Vish, and thank you for joining me here today.
Hello, Dorothy.
So, what is happening in South Africa from the news that we see on television and read on newspapers? It seems very, very alarming. Not just the increasing number of people being infected, but also the situation there wherein people are despite the lockdown or despite the advice to stay at home, they continue to go out also because they need to get food. And there are various ways that people cope with the situation. So what can you share with us?
So the sort of transmission of COVID-19 in South Africa has happened through different waves. And the first was what was called the international wave, meaning coming from the outside of the country. And in that context, the government responded informed by virologists, the epidemiological science on the challenge, and basically reached a conclusion that the best way to kind of manage transmission in the society, and particularly to grassroots communities, was to have a lockdown. And the lockdown commenced in late March, and essentially, the lockdown was a lockdown in one of the most unequal countries in the world. By any metric that you think about. So South Africa basically went into the lockdown, impacting disproportionately on big parts of our working class population, a low wage earning working class population, impacted on a large informal sector. There's about 4 million people in the informal sector, about 1 million of them domestic workers, about 90,000 of them waste reclaimers, and the others are informal traders and so on, who live from hand to mouth, who live every day trying to eke out a living in desperation. So the lockdown impacted them dramatically. You also had massive unemployment kicking in. Our labor market is a precarious labor market. There's been massive pushback of trade unions. And so many people who are on precarious employment contracts also lost their jobs. So the numbers are still coming in, but we probably lost anywhere between 900,000 and 3 million jobs with the lockdown. So it's been devastating on the socio-economic front in terms of the loss of income. On the other side of this lockdown, and at least in the phase that the government's been managing, has been a food crisis, a dramatic food crisis. 14 million people went to bed hungry before the lockdown in South Africa. We've had a food problem in this country for many, many years in the post-apartheid period. Our own work around the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign in 2015, when we were formed, the first thing we did was a hunger tribunal with the Human Rights Commission to bring public testimony, have the faith-based communities bearing witness to this, which revealed the deep crisis of social reproduction which many women were at the front line of, skipping meals, rationing food in their families, borrowing food. The next year, we had a big bread march in 2016. But to fast forward to the present, the point is that crisis, that food crisis, basically revealed itself even more starkly now in the context of the lockdown in South Africa. Our estimation is that there are about 30 million people right now in the country that are food insecure. So the government's response has been in this phase uh, twofold, walking on two legs. So the one was the epidemiological, to try and get the sort of testing going and ramping that up, trying to prepare our hospitals. And I'll come back to that just now. Um, at the same time, trying to make sure that there are certain unemployment benefits in place, that there is an attempt to use the social security system to kick in, and things like that. It's been a very messy first phase of the lockdown. And in that context, I mean, voices from across civil society really came out very, very strongly critiquing the government on a whole host of things. The army has been deployed in the first phase of the lockdown. We've seen some acts of brutality in communities. Some people have been killed, and there's investigations that are kicking in, etc. We've also seen looting of food trucks. The government declared the supermarkets, particularly, and the food value chain, an essential service in South Africa. Now, most people, given low levels of income, etc., and don't necessarily get all their needs met from these supermarkets. So anyway, but people have been taking over trucks. They've been looting supermarkets, etc., out of desperation. The greatest fear we've had is that this will creep into a law and order situation. The government will securitize this. And two nights ago, the state president inaugurated a new phase of sort of COVID management, COVID-19 crisis management in the country. He announced a 500 billion rand stimulus package, and again, responding also to the crisis in the country, and attempting to try to strengthen some of the socioeconomic mitigation measures. Now,
do you think that is enough? It is understandable that not every country, especially in the developing world, is not, most are not prepared for this pandemic. But given this point, it's not the start of the crisis, but we might be not yet the peak, but also there was an ample time for governments to see what is working, what is not working, and do troubleshooting and put in place new measures. So how do you think is the South African government withstanding this pandemic? And do you see any policies that would be positive in the future, or could augur for a more long-term change?
So the government, in our view, had to do what it did because there wasn't that balance between the public healthcare response and the socioeconomic crisis on the ground. And basically, the 500 billion, the state president announced this in sort of broad brush strokes. And that's also a problem in itself, in that, when you make such announcements, you might need even your other cabinet ministers with you, so you fill in the detail. But the difficulty right now is for us to follow and track every minister. And anyway, but that's a separate issue. But the point is that the state president was communicating that they've realized that the food crisis is very, very serious on the ground. So in other words, all the voices that were chiming up, including ourselves, the government took note of that. Their response to the food crisis is to introduce a food voucher system as well as cash transfers. They've also committed to working with the Solidarity Fund that they set up in the first phase. They've invited public donations, etc. So it's a kind of, sort of privatizing of philanthropy approach, and they've centralized a lot of resources in that. That institution has had major blockages. 3 weeks into the lockdown, it has not been able to deliver any serious food parcels. Um, we've made a strong critique of that around partnering with civil society. But nonetheless, the government, the president announced, well, 250,000 food parcels will be distributed.
Mhm.
And, that's inadequate. If you're talking about 30 million people in food need, okay? Um, the other announcement that came through strongly was around boosting resources for people who do not have unemployment benefits, and that was a very important announcement. I think there's about 100 billion there. There's been a big debate in South Africa right now in the phase one of the lockdown. And I'll say more about that just now. But one of the demands that came through very strongly was for a basic income grant. Now, South Africa doesn't have a developed social welfare system, but it does have certain public goods like public health, but it's dualistic with private sector also there, and we can talk more about that. But it also has a social grant system. And the social grants, there are about 5 or 6 different types of social grants. So there's an old age grant, which is about 1,800 rands. There's a disability grant almost at the same level. There's a child grant, which is around 400 and something rands. The parts of South African civil society demanded a top up of these social grants. And so the government and academics and others. And so the government basically topped up at least the child support grant by an additional 500 and other grants for the next 6 months. Um, Others, including ourselves, called for a basic income grant in South Africa, a substantive basic income grant. And this was supported by various voices in South African civil society. Of course, the government didn't concede the basic income grant, but it did concede a COVID-19 relief grant. It's not a lot of money. It's 350 rands for the unemployed, and it'll be there for 6 months. Now, the fact of the matter is a basic basket of essential goods in South Africa costs around 3,400 per month. So even the top-ups that have been done to social grants right now, including the special COVID-19 grant, are just not adequate to meet food needs. The poor in our society spend over 50% of their household income on food. Right now, there are major pressures to buy soap, to buy sanitizers, etc. So there's competing pressures on a small pot of money. This is that crisis of reproduction, even in the context of COVID-19.
I want you to explain further now. When you said that there are various groups with various demands, considering that everyone's on a lockdown and it's very, very difficult, it's impossible to meet up and do the normal way of organizing being done there. There will be no mobilization, no people toy-toying in the street to protest. So what are the various social movements doing at the moment to compensate for that lack of space for organizing and mobilizing? So how is mobilizing being done now?
So post-apartheid South Africa has been through 2 cycles of resistance. The second cycle of resistance threw up various forces against corruption, in defense of our democracy, including the climate justice movement becoming much stronger, food sovereignty, etc. The lockdown came in that context. So there has been a degree of mobilization, vibrancy, etc., in civil society in South Africa when this lockdown hit. And so different forces have taken their struggles before lockdown into the lockdown. It has brought its challenge around how do you find your positioning, how do you find your terrain and your footing in the terrain, what kind of tools do you use as you struggle in the context of COVID-19 and so on. Excuse me. So in our context of our activism around food sovereignty and climate justice, we just continued that into COVID-19. And that meant repurposing our platforms, thinking about how we position certain things. On food sovereignty, we were able to do a whole set of things very fast because we have a loose network across the country. The first thing we did was we called, this has to be put into context. we really don't like supermarkets. But because the crisis was so big, we called on supermarkets to test their conscience, for them to set up people's pantries, to allow for ethical pricing, to provide for a solidarity product in their supermarkets, that when people go in there under relatively safe conditions, they could buy a solidarity product that then could be distributed through the military and police to communities to entrench the constitutional role of these forces, given all our fears, under the watchful eye of faith-based leaders. So that was the first thing we did, and we put up a petition for that on our webpage. The second thing we did very quickly was put up a petition for the basic income grant. The basic income grant is part of our climate justice charter in South Africa, our draft charter. And we quickly set up a series of webinars, and we pulled together the key movements and organizations and public intellectuals that were calling for the basic income grant. And we had that event, we invited the media, etc., into that. This was before the state president's announcement. The third thing we did very quickly was set up a water stress communities tracking tool, and invited communities to track the water situation on the ground. 54% of households in South Africa do not have access to clean water in their homes. There's deep inequality around water resources, and I can say so much about it, but I'm not going to go into it. We just had our worst drought in the history of the country, and the drought is still lingering in parts of the Eastern Cape, etc. And we worked very effectively over the years to build solidarities with those communities as part of our campaigning work. Those communities have been uploading all the information about the lack of delivery by the government. The government has promised to roll out 41,000 water tanks, has promised to make schools accessible as sites of clean water, etc. And what we are finding from the reporting that communities are doing on our webpage is that there are major gaps. And there are very, very serious disconnects with what the government is doing and so on. Actually, this Friday, we are having a webinar, and we titled the webinar, Minister Sisulu, Where's Our Water? Question mark.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. I've seen that invite. Yeah.
And we're going to invite community activists to speak.
These are all sounding excellent and brilliant and very, very inspiring for others as well, to see how, despite the lockdown, everything seems to be working well in terms of organizing, bringing up wonderful ideas, initiative. I want to go to one last concern here. South African activists has always been known for being internationalist. And I'm sure that there's a lot of discussions on how do we bring up all these demands, all this thinking of what would the post-pandemic world look like, and what will be the alternatives that we are calling for and working on to be realized now. So what role do you see for international solidarity, and what can we do here in the UK to bridge with you and build that bridge for international movement and efforts for a post-pandemic world?
I think, yes, this is a very important imperative for all of us. The one thing, and we issued our Earth Day statement yesterday, we are arguing that if you look at COVID-19, it's achieving, ironically and tragically, but it's achieving things we haven't been able to achieve in the context of the climate justice struggle. Oil demand has crashed, oil companies are going bankrupt, and as a consequence, carbon emissions are coming down. The second thing is that in the context of COVID-19, we've seen governments step up, even to feign, but they are forced to display a concern for life and for their societies. They are taking emergency measures, they're repurposing economic institutions, they are putting in place relief programs, etc., etc. The third thing we've seen is this solidarity, human solidarity emerging. Based on a common understanding of a common challenge, an appreciation that we are one humanity, and so on. And so there's an incredible breakthrough that has come through with COVID-19. It's a breakthrough we haven't achieved with the climate crisis. The climate crisis, nonetheless, has still been there in the background. We've seen hundreds of tornadoes smash into the United States, flooding in parts of Kenya, wildfires in parts of the Netherlands, etc., etc. That's continued. I think it's in that context for us that we've got to keep the momentum going. the battle for the future, what comes out of COVID-19 is now. And I think we don't want to return to a carbon-centric world and South Africa. The present government has given mining licenses in this period. It's continued coal-fired based electricity generation. It's given exemptions to Sasol, one of the highest carbon emitters in the world, to continue its particulate pollution, et cetera, et cetera. All of this has been happening now. And we've said unequivocally to the president and his cabinet yesterday in our message, we don't want that future. However, that's a challenge for all of us on a planetary scale. And that means we've got to build the climate justice movement globally now.
Yeah, well, that's very inspiring, very positive. And thank you very much for giving us your time today. And well, we hope to see you here in the future when we can travel again and do our international solidarity meetings. Thank you very much, Bish.
Thank you, Dorothy.